It's the One Podcast.
You meet somebody wealthy, their family at one point was not wealthy. And then the one shows up. The one. One person changes the family tree forever. In my family, I'm the one.
Cool. So we got another episode of the One Podcast here with Jay Wallace. He is a business guy and an entrepreneur who's been in the game a little while. And I think he's got some interesting kind of insights to share with the audience. Jay, do you want to just give a quick background, 30 seconds to our audience of early stage and would-be entrepreneurs on what you've done, and then we can get into the depth?
Sure, yeah. So I'm currently the VP of Global Sales at a cybersecurity startup called VulnCheck. I've been here for about 5 months now. Prior to this, I led go-to-market sales at another cybersecurity startup called Run Zero. I've sort of gone earlier and earlier with every technology company that I've worked for since leaving the financial world. So it's very hard work, but I love it, and I just keep doing it, I guess. So
nice. So how did you get, involved? Like, what was your first company that you were involved with, and kind of how did you get in the space in the first place?
I mean, in retrospect, the first place that I was at was the opposite of a startup. So when I left the financial sector and I moved to technology, I moved to like a 15-year-old private equity-owned oil and gas startup that sold basically giant loads of data.
Cool. And so how did that kind of, were you always somebody who was like interested in startups and you eventually made that transition, or like how do you kind of develop into your eventual path?
No, this is my third career. My first career was in retail grocery. Imagine a 21-year-old kid with 165 employees running a grocery store. That was a pretty wild experience. And also making a fraction of what you make in technology. So it was not a winning proposition, in my opinion. So I left and I went into finance, and I kind of thought finance is where I would be for the rest of my life. I weathered the '08 storm during the downturn. It was super difficult, and eventually made my way into private banking. But something changed along the way. The main thing was I saw like a 27-year-old kid walk in with a $400,000 check. And I said to myself, what did you do to get this? He was like, oh, I was like the 7th engineering hire at this company that just got acquired. And I thought right then and there, I'm in the wrong business. You should really get into tech. Austin's a great place to pivot into tech. There's a lot of ways to do it. You can go the big company route like Dell, get your feet wet, or you can go into the startup world. And I figured out after a couple of years, like bigger private equity owned was not for me. I just wanted to dive in deep at a startup.
Got it. So walk me through, I guess, that first startup and kind of some of the issues that they were dealing with, and what was their sort of niche?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with a lot of private equity companies is that they're at a stage where they want profitability more than they want growth. And I want to grow, and I like building things. I like creating things. So my first, what I would consider a real startup was it was a C round cybersecurity company called Duo Security. What I liked about that was it was a small team in Austin. Company was already about 300 people when I joined. Small team in Austin. They were just launching a brand new program to sell to their install base. So getting to get in as, I think, the second or third person on that team, and helping grow that team, helping solve problems for the company, helping roll out new products. That was a ton of fun. So when we got acquired by Cisco, I made it about 6 months, but of course we're at the big company again. So I got a call from a recruiter, and I jumped into application performance monitoring at a company called LightStep, where I was like the 75th employee or so. I think they were B round at the time I joined. So a little earlier, San Francisco based, only employee in Austin, second remote employee. So you learn a lot about yourself in that sort of scenario. And but again, back to building, trying to solve hard problems for the company. And that led me to my next role during the pandemic. I was like employee number 50 at a company called Screen, another cybersecurity startup. So the trend is sort of go earlier, you can solve harder problems, you can grow at a different pace. And company after that, when I landed at Run Zero, I was employee number 6. So it's as early as it gets. You're part of the founding team. Nothing's in place. You've got to build it all. And I fell in love.
Got it. So we talk to a lot of people who have, I guess, like sales backgrounds where they're sort of like GTM or A's at startups. And a lot of them like go on to found their own businesses because there's kind of like a sort of entrepreneurial spirit, I guess, in that career path. Were you, you mentioned like being interested in sort of problem solving and just being part of these organizations. Like, was that something that kind of you had in the back of your mind at any one point?
Yeah, and I'd probably be lying to say I still don't. I do think that there are philosophically a lot of ways that you can learn business.
Okay.
You can go out, start your own. You could try to figure things out along the way. You can get mentors, you can take venture capital, and hopefully the experience of those former operators helps you learn how to build a business. I've always felt, though, that if you get in early and you learn from people, then you start to see what businesses look like. I also think if you're a lifelong security person, you're going to work in different types of security. Right now, I've gone deeper and deeper into the vulnerability and vulnerability management space. And it's something that I'm finding very, very interesting that I like. If I were to found my own company, after this one, which is going to hopefully be a great outcome, then it would probably be even deeper into the space. So my opinion there is just that if you can take the approach of diving in with both feet, or you can use someone else's money, quite frankly, to figure out how to build businesses. And that's been my last few stops.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because it's something that a lot of people debate, but we've certainly had like a lot of people on who would probably not have, I guess, started companies if they didn't have like the right mentorship and kind of that environment to learn without, going all in right away. Was this something where like you were early stage enough that you were getting like a significant kind of equity stake in the companies? Because I noticed like a lot of them were getting acquired and whatnot.
I think you'd be crazy not to ask for a lot of equity. Yeah. You're going to be responsible for, in the startup world, we're all making a bet. We're making a bet that the one that we just joined is going to be the one that exits for some significant amount of money. That used to be billion or broke. I think with last few years and the way things have shaped out, it's definitely not. I do think the grow at all costs that we've seen over the last decade or so has gotten people thinking that, if it's not $1 billion, it's a failure, or a few $100 million is nothing. But with the right equity package, a few $100 million is life-changing.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I guess, were you in like a bunch of different kind of niches, like oil and gas, to the security stuff? Like, there wasn't any sort of, you weren't trying to find, I guess, like any niche or something to stick with? Like you were kind of swapping between them. Was that for any particular reason?
Didn't know better. Oil and gas, I joined, and 3 months later, the market dropped by 80%. So that was a tough go at it. This is coming off of a career in finance where I had just made it through the downturn of 2008. But it was good. I learned a ton. You don't know what you don't know until you're forced to learn things. I didn't know how to use analytics platforms when I joined that first company. I didn't know how to talk about mineral rights or teach people how to use on-premise software. I didn't know what M&S meant or why we would charge for it. So I didn't know anything. In retrospect, I don't regret it a bit. I learned so much. It was a sort of technical role that I took. I didn't consider myself to be a technical person. It would force me to learn a lot of things. So at the next place, it just made sense. I didn't target cybersecurity. Honestly, I found this company Duo on a Built in Arson article that was like, this company's hiring. and they have a great culture. And I thought to myself, let's give it a shot. I didn't know anything about cybersecurity.
Nice.
And after a 2.5-year run there, I left and I went to performance monitoring, and I found out how hard it is to sell to developers. So shout out to all the people out there selling to developers. It is not an easy job.
Yeah.
But I missed security. I really did. I think the first big security conference that I saw all my friends and colleagues going to, I had FOMO. And I thought to myself, well, I want to get back into security. I want to be back with the people that I know were solving a serious problem. And so I got back in it. I would say now it does matter what type of security I'm doing, because I found a niche that I really enjoy. And you got to have the right product, the right people. But it's like you're talking to the same group of executives that you talked to at your last company. There's something to be said about that. And I would say for entrepreneurs out there, especially serial entrepreneurs, folks that have founded one and maybe had an exit, or maybe it didn't go so well, it is very valuable to be able to go to the same contacts you had at the last place and start a conversation, whether that's a sales conversation or a product feedback conversation or a pricing and packaging conversation.
Sort of, I guess, building that like book of business up through the different
absolutely
options. So I guess, shifting gears a little bit to just sales, like being in these different sales organizations, different industries, what have you found? Like, what's the commonality in terms of the successful companies that go on to have an exit? Like, what's different about their sales?
I have a strong opinion about this. I think they're solving a very old problem that hasn't been fixed yet. If you look at Duo Security, there was an incumbent called RSA, and they were old, they were expensive, they were no longer innovating, and Duo came around right at the right time and said, we'll make an easy button for all of your systems administrators or all of your identity and access management folks. We'll give them an easy button. And by the way, you don't have to talk to sales. You get up to 10 for free. So there was a product-led growth aspect of it. And I think that plus great execution, great product development helped them really hit the road. And what was ultimately a $2.3 billion exit, it was an excellent exit. But if I look at my last company, Run Zero, similar problem, but they were solving for, and are still solving for, an asset discovery, asset management problem that, again, is very old. It's to a market that I think is underserved, on-premise and manufacturing and state and local and things like that a lot of companies just don't find appealing. They want to go into the cloud and they want to solve this cloud problem. And I'm not denying that there is a problem there. But I'm saying if you've got a 10-year-old problem versus a 50-year-old problem that nobody has been able to solve for yet, and you can solve it, you're really onto something.
Jay, were you in any organizations where you would say like their sales sucked, or it was they were on the completely wrong kind of path?
I will say, I won't say their sales sucked, but I will say it was really hard to sell at my
certain things.
One company, LightStep, that by the way went on to have an incredible exit as well to ServiceNow. So even if sales were tough and hard, and it's not like we were closing 30 deals a quarter, it was like we're closing maybe one deal a quarter, at least when I was there. And I think a lot of that had to do with, we had a niche product that solved a problem for very specific people. These were advanced companies that were in the cloud. And I think really the only reason that it was really hard at the time is there was a big incumbent, and there were several big incumbents, and we were solving a problem for a very specific group of companies. And once you capture that 1%, going broader in the market is really difficult. So not so much that the product was bad, it was just that we had to pitch it a certain way. There was a lot of things we were trying to figure out, but that also, for the entrepreneurs out there, goes to tell you these guys still had a really fantastic exit to ServiceNow, even with sales not going gangbusters. So, if your sales are not going great right now, nobody's, by the way, are going great right now. There's a few companies out there, but if sales are tough, you just got to stick with it and figure out, are we not listening to our customers? Are we not pitching our product the right way? Or is it a state of the market and we just need to weather it?
Yeah.
So I would say that would be my answer. Is just you can sometimes be too early to the market, in my opinion, and I think that's what happened there.
Cool. What have you kind of kept up to date with like the different sales development, like sales kind of tech tools out there? And do you have any thoughts on the role that kind of plays in the successful sales organization? It's
Oh
something we
yeah,
had a guy
yeah.
on yesterday, and me and him were kind of talking about how we think it's a lot of it's overblown, and most of the sales success comes from just like kind of not just picking up the phone, but like just being persistent and consistent.
So I agree with that to a degree, but I think there are also a lot of sellers that they spend a lot of time not selling. And the trick is selling, right? If you're in sales and
Yeah.
you're on calls with customers, you're going to close something. I think there's a lot of noise out there, and I've personally adopted a couple of tools. One of them is using their own large language model to write AI. I've found saved me a ton of time because I can hang up a call, it'll write an email for me and send it. That has material impact to sellers being able to sell. I think that having a good CRM and keeping it clean and having good sales operations, which is a people function, really matters too, because if you lose that aspect of it or your data is no good, there's no way you're going to be able to forecast properly or predict trends in the business or figure out where you need to go fix the sales cycle. So with all that said, that was my good corporate answer. You just got to be a good seller. You've got to be a good relationship driver. You've got to spend time on calls with customers, trying to solve their problems. You've got to put them first, ask them questions, ask them for feedback, and be blunt. How do we get a deal done? How do I make sure whatever I'm selling, if you want it and it solves a problem for you, how do we get that done? That sort of feels like a lost art these days. And I think a lot of senior sellers that have been around for a long time have seen the good and the bad. I think a lot of younger sellers that maybe entered the market in 2020 post COVID, they hadn't seen bad until 2022, and probably even worse in 2023. So it's a good wake up call. I've seen a lot of those folks that entered in that sales cycle or entered into that time in sales have now pivoted out and they've gone into different roles like operations.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
I also think that's great, but that's a trend I'm seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that was something we talked about on this last podcast, and it's something that I've been seeing with people who are in that kind of phase. So, sort of to expand on that, but maybe look at it a little broader. So, you obviously being an early stage employee at a startup in the sales organization, is there anything that the founders did in terms of like the speed of growth, overloading the team, overall philosophy? Stuff that you noticed, like being at all these different companies, affected the organization as a whole in terms of just like not necessarily like how big their exit was, but or how quickly it happened, but just like how smooth the journey to that point was.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say like Duo Security is a great example. I mean, we were over 100 million in revenue, and the CTO would still fly out to do customer meetings with me. And I was one of maybe 100 sellers. So
Wow.
That sort of dedication is, you don't see that often. I would also say there is a chance that you grow too fast. I would say at Run Zero, some of our mistakes were made because we grew very fast, and maybe our operations and our reporting didn't grow as fast as we were growing customer count and revenue. And that can be really hard because at some point you have to reset and catch up. So very important that things grow the right way. With all that said, revenue solves all ills. So if you're booking business and you're continuing to grow that way, you can sort of deal with the bad stuff. I do think founders have everything to do with a company's success or failure. And what I mean by that is, are they listening to their customers? Are they building products that people want to actually pay for? I think that the company I'm at right now, I've never seen, founders so hungry for feature requests, because they just sort of get it. The more you listen to your customer, the more you can get out of a customer to tell you, hey, if you build this thing, I will pay you money. That's really the formula, right? You don't want to get distracted and build everything on the planet. I'm not saying that, but I am saying if you've solved a problem for a customer and they're willing to give you more money if you solve another one, you should probably do that.
Got it. What about, do you have any philosophies like tied to this in terms of like hiring good salespeople?
Yeah, definitely. I think it depends on what you're selling. If you're selling, like for example, if I was to say my first salesperson versus my 10th salesperson, they would be two very different profiles. I may be solving a problem at salesperson 1 that I don't need to solve at salesperson 10. When I was at my last company, one of the things that I did was we had a highly transactional early stage team. We were bringing on new logos like crazy. And so I thought to myself, well, what kind of profile do I need for my first hires in that segment of the business? Well, it wasn't some seasoned enterprise seller that would be offended that he has to close a $10,000 deal. It would be somebody like a BDR who's hungry, organized, wants to grow, has a desire to work day and night to get the account executive role. And that's who we hired, and they were very successful in the early beginnings. I would say later on, when the market shifted a bit, it became harder to sell. You needed people that had lots and lots of sales acumen and understood value selling and understood how to not just pitch a product, not just demo a product, but take it all the way to the finish line. And I think sometimes those can be the same profile, but not always. At my current company, we're just starting to look around for who our first hire is going to be. It's funny you ask. We were just, I had a meeting this morning to talk about what kind of profile do we need. And we landed on something very different because our challenges here are not the challenges of the last company, which were not the challenges of the company before that. So my best advice would be just assess what you need and then make your hire and understand that need may change over time.
Got it. You had mentioned when we were talking about in the pre-interview about some companies that you worked at where like the environment was just off because of kind of just like moving too quick. Do you think that that's like why do you think startups like run into that problem? Is it just like kind of the hustle culture, just like seeing all the, kind of big unicorn companies? Is it something in like the founder's psychology? Like how would you, and then secondarily, like if there is like that type of kind of environment, for people who are like planning to become entrepreneurs, or maybe like trying to get that sales experience, get some connections, book a business, whatever, like, do you recommend that they stay away from certain types of groups or companies?
I would say no, with an asterisk to the side that when most companies, most startups, especially early stage, they struggle with product market fit and repeatability. Those are the challenges. Will people buy my product because I'm solving a real problem? Can I do it more than once? And I think sometimes companies can be a victim of their own success. If you really nail product market fit and you operationalize a way to repeat it, then you can certainly grow too fast. I would say also, I would say not my own personal experience, but I know folks that have joined startups that are early stage where it was more like a lifestyle business and the founder is disconnected. My recommendation is if you're a founder, you should be obsessed with your customers. You should spend as much time with them as possible. Even in the earliest stage, asking them questions like, hey, this is what I'm building. Would you pay for it? Okay, great. How much would you pay for something like this? Right?
Yeah. There's something I just want to chime in there, but just like noticing with my own companies, like all the times where I was on the right track and like, you know what I'm saying, just making the right decisions, it was always, I think, influenced by the amount of time that I spent either interacting with the customers, thinking about the customers, you know what I'm saying? And then because it's like it kind of gets percolated in your brain. I think this is natural for any salesperson because they're talking to customers all the time. That's why they're good at selling it. But a lot of times, if you're focusing on kind of the other stuff, just like the operational aspects of the business, you know what I'm saying? Then over time, you can drift away from like kind of the core psyche of the customer base that is, you mentioned before, like revenue solving all problems, right? Like that's the kind of core objective of the company. So the farther you move away from that, I think like the more in danger you are of kind of screwing things up or, running in the opposite direction, right?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's the second you take your eye off the ball, which is solving customer problems, that's when you run into trouble. Said another way, in this environment, I've heard a lot of people say, with all the layoffs that have been happening in technology, the further I am away from the customer, the more at risk I am with my job. I mean, that's another way to look at it too. Even if you're at a larger scale company, if you're in front of the customer, you're the one that are bringing in the dollars. And you've got a lot more job security than if you're, let's say, middle management, or you're further away from solving customer problems.
Got it. I guess another kind of sort of HR-y type question that I think you might be able to shed some perspective on. There's been like a lot of kind of like viral like news stories about like these layoffs recently, right? And I'm kind of, I've fired people before in a short time period, right? Like after that kind of quota period, or like very closely after that. Obviously there's like a political, like the right way of doing the firing, but like in a sales organization, do you believe there are people that are just like naturally low performers that you have to kind of get rid of based on, you know what I'm saying? Like, is there some type of metric that you use to subscribe that? Because I think it's all good and well to say, hey, if we have a great culture, people are focusing on the product, blah, 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 blah. People can sell, but it does, in my experience, I have seen, and maybe this is just like my bad leadership, but some people could not sell even when I felt like the product or what we were selling was in high demand.
Some people are not natural sellers, and I think
Sure.
the natural sort of things that you look for in sellers is curiosity. They're inquisitive. They want to learn. They want to get to know people. I do think that there is a time in the earlier the startup, the quicker you have to make this type of decision, right? Because you don't have time to not build repeatability. So if you're a small early stage startup and someone is not a fit, and when I say not a fit, it can't just be performance based. I guess it can. If they've sold nothing and it's been, a year, then obviously you have to make a call. But sometimes it can also be toxic culture when you're trying to build something from the ground up, bringing in the wrong people at the wrong time. That can be pretty detrimental. And I think you have to also make a call on those types of things. It's never fun to fire anybody. That sucks. It's like the worst thing. It'll be the worst day of that person's week, and it'll be the worst day of your week. Even if you can't stand the person or they can't stand you, it's still like
bad.
A bad breakup.
Still unpleasant.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I think it's you just sort of have to. It goes back to your hiring practices. I think sometimes look back at yourself and ask yourself, did you do the right due diligence? Yeah, I found at times I overlooked little things, things that I would assume people knew how to do, like be a good corporate citizen, show up to meetings, those types of things. And then they don't, and you're sort of left scratching your head, like, what did I miss? Other times you just find out interviews are typically a month or less, maybe weeks time. You spend a few hours with someone, and then you get into a relationship with that person because you pay them, you bring them on board, you expect certain things of them, and they may just not turn out to be the same person you thought they were in the interview process. But that's the difficulty in hiring. And that's why it's long been known that it's one of the most expensive decisions you can make is hiring wrong.
Yeah. I've learned that one the hard way, but I would agree with you in that I think that a lot of it has to do with the hiring. But do you think that there's anything kind of in terms of like mindset, or just maybe even not mindset, but just like the onboarding or like setting people's expectations post hiring?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be honest with people, and I think when you don't know how to coach and you don't know how to give feedback, that's really detrimental. You have to be like constantly giving feedback. I'm not a big fan of annual reviews, so I say that because I think if you're at a startup and you're waiting for an annual review to tell some engineer or some salesperson or somebody in your operations team that they're not doing a good job, What are you doing? You should be giving constant feedback in your weekly one-on-ones or your bi-weekly one-on-ones or whatever they are, on good or bad. You should be coaching. I mean, that's really your role as a leader at an early stage company, is to coach everybody up at the company. You have to
Yeah.
expect that they're going to come in right around where you want them to come in, but that they're going to grow and get better over time.
Yeah. Well, it's like what you brought up with that CTO who was like jumping on the calls and whatnot. I'm sure that like made a big impact in terms of like your ability to sell and confidence in the product and everything.
Absolutely.
So I guess, on a kind of second note, like, so we have this like crowd accelerator, right? Where we're working with people who are like doing side hustles, or maybe they're thinking about a company, right? While they're fully involved in whatever kind of sales position or career that they have. Um, in terms of like just like building up what's the right way to like build up good connections while you're working for a company, as a high level salesperson or entry level? Like, what's the best way to kind of get that, just build your network so that potentially you could utilize it later for your own, venture?
I would say there's a few ways. I would say the most obvious is reach out to people. Try to talk to people that look like where you want to be. If that's an entrepreneur, if that's a chief revenue officer somewhere, expect that a lot of them are not going to be able to get back to you, but some will. So in some ways, you have to be your own business development person and reach out to people that you think could be valuable to you at some point. I have found also, if you've done any kind of enterprise sales, you're typically going to be talking to C-level folks at big companies, and those folks tend to be angel investors. So,
Right.
getting to know them, treating them right, understanding what they're up to, that can be absolutely invaluable. They'll also, when you build a good relationship, they'll also tell you you're about to screw up, and that's also just as valuable. Like, hey, nobody's ever going to buy this, or this is 5 years early. So, I think that's a great way to do it. I also think that whether you're a sales leader or an engineering leader or whatever else, you need to also know other people in industry. So if you plan to have a career in cybersecurity and you're, let's say, a VP of sales or maybe a mid-level manager, but want to eventually get to be a VP of sales, you should probably know some, and you should probably spend some time with them, because they're going to tell you sort of the ins and outs, and you never know. There's a saying in the security industry that it's very tiny and it gets smaller every day. When you're talking, there's 100,000 people in the cybersecurity industry plus, but it's like you bump into the same people over and over and over again. So you got to make sure you take care of your relationships. I would say, if I could attribute like one thing to my career trajectory, it's just been like building and maintaining good relationships with people.
Got it.
There's like no way I would have even been to any of the companies or worked with any of the people that I worked with if I didn't maintain really good relationships.
Cool. So I guess tying that everything together and closing things out, what's your from all these different experiences that you've had, right? Like the different companies, is there sort of a number one or maybe two factor that just really has stood out to you in the company's longevity and success?
Yeah, work your ass off. It's
Yeah.
going to be the hardest thing you ever had to do.
Which is kind of like that's just like the hard truth, I guess, or the obvious truth.
Yeah, if you go into it thinking anything but that you're not going to have long nights and long weeks and long flights and long board meetings and all of those things, then you're probably looking at doing something else. I think that you just have to sort of expect it if you're going to be an executive at, I would say, any company, but
Any company.
the startup world is very hard and so
Yeah.
few make it. So you just got to be prepared to dig in.
Cool. Jay, where can people find you, and where do we push them?
Yeah, I'm on
Do you do any
LinkedIn.
coaching, or?
What is that?
I said I was going like, do you do any coaching, or like are you open to mentoring people?
Yeah, I do. And I have a passion for that. So I would say if anybody, reaches out to me on
Awesome.
LinkedIn, it is on fire all the time. So if I don't get back to you right away, I
Nice.
promise I'm just sifting through all the BDRs that are reaching out and, all the recruiters that are reaching out. But Jay Wallace, VPS is where you can find me on LinkedIn. And I do have a passion for helping, younger folks that are entering the market, maybe helping them navigate either how to enter the, SaaS market, SaaS sales market, or, how to climb the ladder or even pivot out of the industry that they're in, because I've got experience with all of those things.
Cool. Jay, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
This is the One Podcast.